Welcome back to the Grand Tribe Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Payne, and this week we've got something that's really kind of special and something that probably is going to make some folks feel a little bit uncomfortable, and that's because we're talking about the difficult topic of estrangement. And this week we've got Dr. Joshua Coleman, who's a psychologist, author, nationally recognized expert on family estrangement and reconciliation. He's got well over 4 decades of clinical experience and has devoted much of his recent work with helping families understand the complex nature of those relationships between parents and their adult children. Now, if Dr. Coleman sounds familiar, not only does he have the books out that you may have come across if you've been working through estrangement with your family, he's also been featured in some of the major media outlets such as New York Times, The Atlantic, NPR, and The Today Show. So we are really lucky to have him on to talk about this important topic with us. And whether you're going through estrangement yourself, which is completely unfortunate, or maybe you have friends or other family members that are going through this or feel like the relationships might be heading in this direction, this is a great episode for you. And be sure to share this with somebody who may need to hear some encouragement that Dr. Coleman has for us. But before we jump into this conversation, I want to remind you, please be sure to go over and subscribe to the newsletter and our quarterly publication that comes out. It's a great way to stay on top of current events and current trends for grandparents, as well as a way to make sure that you stay an active member of this Grand Tribe community. So, before we jump into this conversation with Dr. Coleman, we're going to hear a word from this week's sponsors, and then we're getting right into the show.
Hey, grandparents. If the grandkids haven't seen WikiSticks, here's your chance to be a hero yet again. WikiSticks are perfect for hours of open-ended creative fun. And here's a sneaky tip. Visit our website, wikisticks.com, and see all the fun things you can make, practice a little, and then voila! Dazzle the grandkids. They'll join right in and you'll all have tons of fun, showing each other the cool and creative things you can make with WikiSticks.
Hi, Dr. Coleman. Welcome to the Grand Tribe Podcast. I'm excited to have you on to talk about this important topic that I think more and more grandparents are going through.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's a big topic. I agree.
What I wanted to do is, I think, get started with how can we react, or what do we know when estrangement might be showing up in a relationship, especially with the adults? Are there any tells, or is there anything that's going on that maybe we can see ahead of time that there's some problems that we can address?
Well, I think what's important for parents and grandparents to know is that estrangement is on the table, in ways that it probably wasn't for our generation of boomers and Gen Xers. So many parents and grandparents say to me, well, I wasn't crazy about my parents either, but I'd never cut them off. And the things I've been cut off for by comparison seems really trivial. So what that means is that an adult child may cut off a parent for things that are, by their own reckoning, fairly small or trivial. And it's important to treat the adult child's complaints or limits or boundaries, et cetera, particularly with grandchildren, with great care and respect, and not to be dismissive or not to assume that the relationship is so strong that your child may not ever cut you off. Because typically, these days, if an adult child cuts off parent, they cut off access to the grandchildren too, including good, loving, decent grandparents. So it's a more fraught time for family relations.
So it sounds like one of the things that grandparents can really watch out for is maybe the frustration, maybe the unsaid things that might happen at gatherings, at communication, that may be a little bit of a tell that, hey, there might be a need to have some heart-to-heart conversations.
Yeah, exactly. That to not be too dismissive, whatever the complaints were, the arguments, or anything like that, to use this as an opportunity to kind of deepen the relationship with the adult child and understand them better and show yourself as somebody who's willing to work on the relationship or work on yourself or work on your communication, because that really is the more 21st century model of parenting, that people have to be willing to, quote, work on themselves and work on their abilities to communicate and what kind of person they are. So it's a very new era that parents, older generations have to kind of get with the times with.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because there is, I think, a tendency with Gen X and boomers and people that when all of a sudden younger parents with our grandchildren stop returning texts and stop calling and things, and then they go, oh, well, I just don't want to have anything to do with you. There is this kind of like, what the hell? We argued, so what? What's the big deal? But I think the
Right.
younger generations take these things differently than what we used to.
Yeah, it's so easy to you get so much support these days for calling your parent or grandparent toxic or borderline or boundary crossing or gaslighting or whatever. There's all these kinds of labels that can be assigned to a parent or grandparent, and that just kind of arms somebody, a younger generation, for saying, well, you're just impossible, or you're not worth dealing with, or I can't have a good, healthy relationship with you, or you're bad for my mental health, and all those kinds of things that can really put people on a fast track to estrangement.
So when that happens to somebody, and what are some of the steps that can be taken? Because I feel like you have to get the feedback from the adult child or the daughter-in-law, son-in-law, whatever. You've got to have that feedback to kind of know where to start a communication. So,
Yeah, right. Well, we don't always know. I mean, sometimes our children just start being more withdrawn or less available or not returning texts or phone calls or having excuses. And, I think it's useful at that time to ask if there's something that's going on. You might say something like, well, you seem a little more distant lately. Maybe you're just busy, but I also wonder if there's something that I've done or said in the recent or distant past that caused you to feel like you need more space from me. If so, I just want you to know that I'm open to getting feedback and working on the relationship. And if it's something that, we can talk about together, if it'd be easier to do with a therapist present, I would welcome that as well. Because some estrangements happen because sometimes the adult child is conflict avoidant, or they feel like, well, I already have tried and you always respond defensively, so why keep trying? Right.
right.
So for those reasons, it's good to kind of position yourself as somebody who's willing to do the kind of work that they're wanting you to do.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit too about that idea of using a mediator or a third party, assuming that both participants, let's say, are agreeable. How does that help to smooth things out versus just the back and forth between the two principals, let's say?
Well, it's got to be the right person. I mean, I have a book that's coming out in November called Estrangement Reconciliation Therapy, a new model for family conflict. And I wrote it because most therapists don't really get the kind of moment that we're in, where parents don't have the same kind of power or authority that earlier generations did. And that means that what I always tell parents before doing family therapy is this isn't marriage therapy, right? Where you get to kind of have your own claim about how much time you're going to spend together, what the relationship's going to look like, what your boundaries are, what your complaints are. It's more like there's been a divorce and, your ex gets to say what the terms of the relationship are going to be. That's the same way that this therapy is going to go, because your adult child needs to feel like there's enough kind of room and safety for them to talk about their perspective. And if you talk too much about your perspective, they're just going to leave. So it can't just be any therapist or mediator, because a lot of well-meaning, good therapists who are trained in everything else just don't know crap about this area, and they just make things worse because they don't understand it.
Yeah, I guess it would be you're applying the wrong model to the current situation that's in front of you, and you're not getting those
results.
That's
exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right.
How can, I guess, older parents / grandparents, it feels like, I think sometimes when there is estrangement, that we can feel like we don't have any power over the situation. Power in the sense of, I can't just go fix something. I can't just send a card and it's all better. I've got no power, and they've got access to my grandkids who maybe I don't have any issues with.
Right. Yeah. Well, you have to start by sort of accepting that that is the reality, that particularly once a child is estranged, they hold all the cards. So, you know, in the old days and in many cultures still, parent or grandparent could use guilt to kind of manipulate or push or pressure the child into contact. But that ship has basically sailed. And that's why I constantly will stress the importance of being willing to communicate in the ways that I've been kind of illustrating thus far, which is to think in more therapeutic kind of language. And it's often hard for older generations who haven't been raised with that in the same way that the younger generations have. And in the older generations, ideas about what's abusive or traumatizing or, you know, hurtful behavior is very different than what younger generations are labeling as such. So, so it's really incumbent on the parent or grandparent to learn that language, you know, because it's not going to probably happen unless they can. That is the dominant language. That's the lingua franca of this era.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, sounds like for all of us grandpas that kind of, or people that kind of came up in the 80s and 90s, we can't just throw on a power tie and walk into the room and then assert
Right.
ourselves in these things.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's not going to fly.
So, what is one of the biggest mistakes that that either, let's say, the adult children or the older parents make when they try to reconcile? I mean, I feel like sometimes it could be, hey, I sent a text message, we should be fine. But what are some of those mistakes that we can oftentimes make when we're trying to reconnect?
I mean, for the adult child, I think not being sensitive enough to knowing what it's going to feel like as your parent. If you're telling your parent that they failed you or neglected you or harmed you or abused you, and you as a parent don't feel that way. And so I think putting it into this kind of diagnostic language that I see in so many of these letters, well, I learned in therapy, you're emotionally immature, or you're a narcissist, or you're a borderline, or you're a boundary crosser. I mean, it's not going to evoke much openness from your parent. If that's the goal, it's much better to approach them with what you liked or valued about their parenting first, and then talk about your complaint, but to do it in a behavioral way, not in a diagnostic way. You know, when I felt like, you know, the kid might say, I felt neglected by you. You were always at work or you were always involved in your own activities. I didn't feel like I got the kind of attention from you that I really wanted or needed. And it had a big impact on me. And I'd like to talk with you about that. I mean, that would still be painful for the parent to hear if that's not their understanding of their child's childhood. But at least it's a way to raise the topic that's less likely to evoke defensiveness. On the part of the parent, I think the biggest task is to find the kernel, if not the bushel of truth, in the child's complaints, and to speak to those, to not defend, to not explain, to not blame anybody else. Oh, that's your therapist talking, or, you know, you're just saying that because you and your mom and I divorced and she's poisoned you against me, or your spouse doesn't like me, or, I mean, you know, blaming other people or blaming the child. Well, you had ADD, you had learning disabilities, you had to go to rehab, you had to go to therapeutic boarding school. I mean, none of those things are going to work if a child is estranged. The only thing they want to hear from the parent is, are you interested in what I have to say? Can you show curiosity? Can you show empathy? Can you take responsibility? Are you willing to change or not? If you're not, then I'm not really interested in having a relationship. Now, the parent could do everything right and the kid still may not open the door. So I don't want any parent to feel like, God, I've done all that and it hasn't worked, because they don't. It really is contingent on whether or not the adult child is able and willing to accept the amends letter, you know, whether it's a letter or any other form. And they're not always, but for those who are really kind of ready and willing to work on the relationship, those are the key ingredients.
What are some of the things that maybe grandparents can do to try to figure out what it is that's caused the distance? I think sometimes I've heard different stories where it's like, I don't know what the heck I did or what this situation was, and they won't tell me, right? And so it's like trying to pin the tail on the donkey, and you got no idea where to start.
Yeah, it's not terribly unusual. And I encourage parents to write what I call the flush them out of the bushes letter, which is where you might say something like, "Dear son or daughter, I'm writing to see if it's possible to open up a dialogue with you. I know you wouldn't have cut off contact unless you felt like it was the healthiest thing for you to do. That said, I don't completely understand and would like to. It's clear that I have significant blind spots as a parent, or as a person, or as a grandparent, and I'm wondering if you'd be open to giving me more feedback about things that I've done either in the recent or distant past when I was raising you that have caused you to feel like you need to have this distance. If this is something you'd like me to work on in my own therapy, I'm open to, or if you want to be willing to do family therapy, I would welcome that as well. Hope you let me know. Love, mom, dad, etc." And I call it flush them out of the bushes letter because as I was saying earlier, a certain percentage of estrangements do happen because the child is conflict avoidant and so it's kind of encouraging them to, it's kind of like a way of saying, come on in, the water's fine. You can complain about me if you need to or if you want to. And if there have been complaints in the past that haven't gone well, it'd be good for the parent to say something like, "I know you've tried to raise these issues in the past and I was defensive, but I've realized that that's not a good way for me to respond. And I'm if you're open to giving me another chance, I would welcome that."
Okay, that's a great idea, and I love the idea of that letter and how you listed those things out.
Yeah.
As somebody's working through trying to get reconciliation moving, there's probably going to be a period where you're just waiting. It's weeks, months between texts or a phone call or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you advise parents to, I don't know, manage through that period when there may also still be birthdays for grandkids or birthdays for the adult kids, anniversaries, big dates? How do you advise us to, I don't know, keep hope alive while we manage through the messy middle?
Yeah. Well, I think that is the chief question that I get from estranged parents and grandparents. And a lot of grandparents say, "Look, I could probably tolerate or learn how to tolerate the estrangement from my kid, but becoming estranged from my grandchild is a whole nother level of pain," in large part because most estrangements that happen with the grandchild aren't because of the behavior as grandparents. It's more the complaint that the adult child has about them as parents, and then the adult child says, "Well, if it's not good for me, it's not good for my kids," which I think is wrong-headed, but that is kind of what's often said. So, what I often tell, if you've sort of done everything that I recommend, like write these amends letters, show a willingness to see things from the child's perspective, being willing to accept their boundaries, their limits, etc., and none of that has worked, then it's probably best to just step way back and not continue to reach out, because that can sometimes make things worse, because then the child can feel like you're not respecting their boundaries. But in terms of the pain, I think the principle of radical acceptance is really the best thing to do, which is to just sort of learn to say it is what it is. There's nothing more that I can do. I can't continue to torment myself over this, which is often harder for mothers than fathers. I think we as men tend to be better compartmentalizers. We're also more likely to get pissed off, whereas mothers are more likely to take it internally and self-criticize, self-blame, etc. So it can be really hard on grandmothers. But these principles of radical acceptance, and making sure that it's not ruining your life, because it's easy for it to kind of you to stop socializing, you stop doing other things that are meaningful, which is a serious mistake, because we need the reflection of other people in our lives, because the mirror our children hold up to us is so powerful.
I like that. And in your opinion, does it help or hurt or make no difference if grandparents maybe write letters and birthday cards and maybe they're stuck in a drawer somewhere for an eventual reconciliation where these things can be delivered?
Yeah. I think that, unless grandparents have been told not to send gifts or cards to grandchildren, I think they can and should continue, because grandchildren, they're not tracking things in the same way that the parents are. But if they've been forbidden to, or every time they send something, it's returned to sender, or the parents say, "Oh, you're crossing our boundaries, stop sending gifts to my children," then they have to stop. But yeah, I think that things like keeping maybe like a treasure chest that if tragically you aren't able to reconcile with your your adult child and have time with your grandchildren before they die, that they get that upon your passing, and every year you actually did get them a gift and you did write a card for them, the cards and gifts that you wish that you could have sent. I think that's could be very meaningful to a grandchild of any age.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because I just wasn't sure if that's like something that just keeps bringing pain back up or if it's something that is a useful tool for grandparents.
I mean, I think if it's too painful to do it, then it's okay to not do it. But if for some grandparents, it feels better to at least send something because they at least feel like they're being grandparents in that way. But I think if it's too painful to do it and continue to be rejected, I think it's okay to stop.
Okay. And I know we've been talking a lot about when grandparents and older parents become estranged because of the wishes of the adult children, but have you ever come across the reverse of that where grandparents have set up, and I almost don't want to say boundaries, but I think we're also kind of in that space as well, where grandparents have needed to put space and distance between themselves and that family?
Well, yeah, particularly, I mean, so many grandparents say to me, I feel like when I'm around my grandchildren, my adult child or their spouse supervise me so closely, they treat me like I'm a pedophile. They won't let me have an overnight with my grandchildren, whereas the other grandparents are allowed to like take them on vacation. If they have to be in the same room with me, it's like they worry if they're alone with me. And there's no reason for them to have any of these kinds of worries. And at some point, it just becomes not worth it because I am being treated so abusively. And I think that for some grandparents, I understand why they'd feel like it's just not worth it to me to have this limited time with my grandchild if I'm going to be treated so abysmally. I mean, in general, strategically, my counsel would be to keep trying because, over time, it's certainly, first of all, it's a way to bond with your grandchildren and continue to work on your relationship with them. But it also means that over time, if things do soften with the adult child or their spouse, there's more opportunities to work on the relationship in that way.
Okay, that makes sense. And I want to ask you too about the specialization in reconciliation family therapy.
Mhm.
How would people go about finding somebody that specializes or has that right toolkit? Um, I know when I look on websites, it's like, hey, this person works with addiction and this and this and this.
Yeah.
Is this something that's now being listed under services, or how would we go about finding somebody that could really help us mend those fences?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people, I think it's probably only a handful of people who are doing that these days. So I don't know if people are yet listing themselves, but they should, if they're going to say they deal with this, so they should be kind of quizzed about what their method is and whether they've read my work or people who, like me who specialize in this, because as I said, you could be a really good therapist, but completely miss the boat with this topic. So they should really grill that person to see what their approach is and how they handle these kinds of dynamics in families.
Okay. And do you have any of those types of questions or anything that are available on your website that people could find easily? I know you got
You
the
mean in
book
terms of
coming out.
you
Right.
mean in terms of what you mean? Oh, questions like what to ask a
Right.
therapist? I don't,
Yes.
but it's a good question. I should. Yeah, it's probably be a good thing for me to write about and post somewhere. Yeah, it'd be useful.
Because I know if it's me listening to this, I'm going to go, oh, yeah, that's totally right. And then I'm going to forget it. So
Where do I
maybe
go?
what we'll
Right.
do is we'll put these into the show notes and help people out that way.
It's probably a good idea. Yeah, I like that.
So when reconciliation, and we talked about when there is the break, we talked about when there is an extensive, let's say, pause, but when reconciliation doesn't look like it's going to happen, what is one of the ways that you can help people, I don't know, learn to get acceptance with this? And we talked about the radical acceptance, but what are some things, because I don't think I want to feel like that relationship's dead, but it's certainly on life support.
Yeah. I mean, what I tell parents is have one foot in radical acceptance and one foot in hope, because the majority of these cases do eventually resolve. So I think there's reason to be hopeful, but there's also maladaptive hope. If you're telling yourself you can't live your life until your kid and grandkid comes back, you're making a mistake. You have to live your life anyway. And you also have to have kind of a 360-degree approach to your emotions. It's not enough just to be in therapy. You also have to make sure that you're exercising and that you have a reasonable diet and that you have a social life and that you have meaningful activities or work if you have meaningful work, because estrangement can attack people at their core identity. And so it's critically important that people have other sort of sources of psychological and emotional support, so they're not just feeling like I can't be happy without my child in it. You can be happy without your child in it, but you're also going to be unhappy at the same time. It's kind of like living with, chronic pain in a certain way, or other kinds of things that can be distracting or occasionally come up frequently, but that doesn't mean that life has to grind to a halt because of that. In fact, it's a mistake to let it grind to a halt because of that.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. And Dr. Coleman, I know I've had you on for a little bit. We could spend hours on this subject, and you've
Easily,
written books.
yeah.
But is there anything maybe today that has popped into your mind that I haven't asked you that you would love to share with the audience?
No, I think these are all really good, pertinent questions. I mean, journalists will often ask me, well, at what point should somebody cut off a family member? And, I'll say, look, I'm happy to answer that question. But as a society, we have to recognize that even if we say, oh, we can see why that person would cut off that parent, estrangement is always a cataclysmic event in a family system, because typically grandchildren are going to get cut off. If there's other grandchildren and cousins involved, they may get cut off because some of the siblings may ally with the parent. Others may ally with their estranged siblings. Aunts and uncles may get cut off. So it really fractures the whole system. And I think as a society, we have to stop thinking about these things in this much more kind of an individualistic way, because estrangement isn't, even if it is between, let's just say, a mother and a daughter, if that daughter cuts off mom and then cuts off access to the grandchildren, then, if there's other kids involved, that's going to affect them and it's going to affect the grandchildren. And so I just think as a society, we have to do a better job in thinking about the ways that estrangement fractures the whole system.
Okay.
Particularly because we as a society are struggling with, record high rates of mental illness and loneliness and social isolation. And, in some ways we need family more than ever at a time where we're being told over and over again that family's not that important. What really matters is your own individual happiness. And it's harder to have individual happiness if you don't have family support. So that's why I want people to find the tools to make that happen.
Absolutely, especially because I agree that there's almost two different sets of messaging going on. One is that if somebody makes you sad, cut them out of your life. And on the other hand, it's like, well, family is always going to make you sad. That's part of being in a family, right? And that's the old school part of things. But yeah.
But to your point, I mean, conflict is unavoidable. People sometimes say, well, you wouldn't let a friend treat you like that. But it's like, well, it's a different set of rules with friends than it is with families. You also wouldn't treat your friend the way that you're treating your parent or your sibling. So, we're much more relaxed in what we do with our parents or our adult or our children, grown or young. So it's kind of it's sort of, comparing apples and oranges in a wrong-headed way, I believe.
No, I appreciate that insight. And Dr. Coleman, thank you so much for being on the Grand Tribe podcast. I've enjoyed this conversation with you. And where can people find you? Where can they reach out, find your books, and get on the queue for the new one coming out?
Sure. I mean, the best place is my Substack, Family Troubles, currently number 2 in Substack. And I have regular weekly webinars there that are just part of a paid subscription. So only $7 a month, which is a pretty good deal. And I write articles there every week, probably 4 articles or so a week, sometimes about grandparenting, but about estrangement in general. So that's probably these days the best place. Also my website, www.drjoshuacoleman.com. There's other resources there as well.
Oh, okay. And we'll be sure to put those into the show notes because I know folks are on treadmills and whatnot and listening to this. So
Right.
thank you again for a great conversation. I really enjoyed this and I've learned a lot from this.
Good, Greg. Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, grandparents! If the grandkids haven't seen WikiSticks, here's your chance to be a hero yet again. WikiSticks are perfect for hours of open-ended creative fun. And here's a sneaky tip. Visit our website, wikisticks.com, and see all the fun things you can make, practice a little, and then voila, dazzle the grandkids. They'll join right in and you'll all have tons of fun, showing each other the cool and creative things you can make with WikiSticks.